Whirlwind romance. It's not uncommon for them to pull you in quickly. It goes quickly. It might go quicker than you want it to go. And they take great delight in, if you put the brakes on and say, wait a minute, this is going too fast, they take great delight in trying to change your mind. It's conquering, part of it is. And they can be very seductive. One of the things that is typically common in relationships with narcissists is that it will be a very intense sexual relationship. It is a conquest. It'll move quickly, and they will do everything they can to convince you to go in the direction that they want you to go. Now, that can be that's a pretty heady experience. That you can feel very loved and treasured, and this guy is really head over heels for me. And do you know what you're getting into? Heavens no. That comes later. Now, if you're married to someone, the one thing that is very common, I'm going to get this because it's easier. The false image projection, that's the best picture I think we could put up there. When you start to disappoint them, one of the things that they tend to do when they're involved with you initially is idealize you. They see you as the best self. You are wonderful. You're somebody who can make my life wonderful. Over time, can any of us live up to that? Nope. I remember a college professor saying in undergrad, you're not prepared to live together until you're prepared to live alone. And many times these people they're rather empty inside. They want you to make them happy. None of us can do that. You will begin to disappoint them. You're not going to live up to their expectations. You're not going to fulfill their dreams. You're not going to be the person that they idealize you to be. And the change starts to begin, or once the honeymoon is over, however long that takes, that change will begin. Now, most people that are in a relationship with somebody like this, when you look back, did you see signs of that? Yeah, pretty much did. Did I see it then? No, it doesn't jump out at you, but it will over time. Everything is about him or her. If they're interested in doing it, you're going to do it. If they're not interested in doing it, you can't do it either. You want a girls' night out, I'm not watching the kids. I've got things to do, or they will do things even to sabotage something like that. They get home late, it's too late for you to go. They really want your attention and your time and your feet nailed to the floor. But if it's something they want to spend money on, if it's an amusement park they want to go to, if it is some social occasion that they want to attend, fine. It will be their friends. It will be their interests. It will be what they want to budget money for. Now, sometimes it's not always that easy to see, but in the long run, you see the pattern. Constant needs for attention and admiration. That's unending. With people who are, for instance, my friend who was deeply wounded as a child, has been very successful. And I have looked at him and said, is it ever, now this guy's got some insight, thankfully. And his empathy is great in some ways. And in other ways, I'm thinking, wow, how can you not see this? How can you not feel this? So it's a real mix in that situation, but it's been a real learning experience for me. But I have said to him, when will it ever be enough? When will it convince you that you are worthwhile? And he will look at me and say, probably never. Because this stuff that deeply wounds people in childhood, man, it doesn't go away. I think we can work at it, and people do change, and he has changed over time. But there has to be some insight, and many times that's missing. Unable to feel empathy, we've talked about that, so that even when they hurt you, are they ever going to apologize for it? No, they don't feel it. For many of you, you might be thinking, that's just hard to imagine. But the wiring is not there. And that's hard for any of us to get into those shoes and think, how do you just not feel? How do you just not attach? They don't care about your feelings, your thoughts, your ideas, so that when you do share things with them, it's minimized, it's dismissed. You can tell, lots of times they're not even listening to you when you're talking about it because it's really not that interesting to them. And then, if you talk about concerns about the relationship, look out, because that's very threatening. And when they are threatened, you're going to meet with anger, irritability. They are going to, in some way, let you know that it is unacceptable to talk about something. What? You are complaining about me? They're not going to let you do that in one way or another. And so typically what will happen is people will just shut down. You learn not to talk about things because you know it's going nowhere good. It's not going to accomplish anything. Talk to the hand. They're not open to it. And then what do? They turn around and say, when they have an affair with someone else, we never talk. You never talk to me. But no one has lived what you have lived to the point where you just get quieter and quieter and quieter because a discussion is not something that you have. The fault is always going to be yours. No question about it. You are going to be the one at fault. Even if he hurts you or she hurts you, that's still your fault. If you hadn't said that, if you hadn't done that, you're too sensitive, you take things too personally, everything is dismissed. It will always come back to being your fault. Now, how can any human being live if all the time it's your fault? That is a systematic diminishing of another person. Just like sandpaper. It will wear you away until by the time you're done, you are struggling to have a sense of self yourself. Because it just takes a toll on you a little at a time. But it's almost imperceptible. Like the story of boiling a frog to death. Put it in a pan of cold water, slowly heat it up. By the time it realizes that that water's hot, it's too cooked to jump. And many times that's true for people. They will put you down to build themselves up, constantly making comparisons, whether it's you or someone else. I know my niece's husband, Mike, his sense of humor that she has always hated is always about making comments about other people. Caustic, sarcastic comments about other people. He thinks that's a great sense of humor. It's hurtful. But because he doesn't have empathy, who cares? Somebody's on the receiving end of that? Oh well, they're too sensitive. They just take things too personally. I'm only kidding. So, and a corollary to the fault will always be yours is that the rules don't apply to them. Even social rules. They'll live by those if they want to. The law, they will keep the law if they want to. But they are above that. They are superior. They don't have to listen to that kind of stuff. So, let's say you get an invitation to go to someone's house for dinner. It's not someplace he wants to go. You might say yes anyway because that's the give and take of social law. He only does it if he wants to go because that give and take in relationships isn't there. It's truly just one way in their minds. Control is an absolute obsession. They have to control everything. I mean everything. And giving you control creates fear in them. If you challenge their control, it's met with anger. And that goes along with it's all about them and they want it their way and they want to do what they want to do and they want to go where they want to go and it's their timetable and I'll get home when I want to get home and this is what we're going to do and these are the people that we're going to be with and it's just control, control, control. And you get to be the loser. And that comes back to walking on eggshells. We talked about that. That's a hard way to live. You start to wonder, what if I say this? What if I do that? Because you cannot predict very adequately. Even when you try to know somebody, you can't predict very well what's going to set them off next. Because their expectations are theirs. This is how I think it ought to be. This is how you ought to act. This is what you ought to be doing. If you cared about me, you would this. If you didn't care about me, you would that. You have to try to read their minds. You make mistakes all the time. Walking on eggshells. Many times people will end up with problems with anxiety, depression, whatever, because you're living with them. And then, in the end, many times, not always, but they will move on to someone else. And for many people who are very narcissistic, they're with you for a season. But when you no longer meet those needs and I'm disillusioned with you or I'm tired of you, because they get bored pretty easily, I'll move on to someone else. Now, let's switch to parenting. And I don't have a whole lot up here. This is a whole different thing that we won't take too much time on because of time. But obviously children are very vulnerable as they are growing up. Their brains are developing, their personalities are developing. And when you have a narcissistic parent, typically that parent will only smile upon that child when that child mirrors back to them what they want. You think what I want you to think, you say what I want you to say, you believe what I want you to believe. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your personality is, doesn't matter what you're good at. This is what I want you to do, this is the sport I want you to be in. These are the people that I want you to hang around with. This is the school I want you to go to. And who that child, in a sense, was born to be, doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. They're simply an extension of the parent and who the parent fantasizes that child to be. And obviously there are parents, we talked about that, parents who live through their children. And how often, you as an adult cannot live up to the expectations of a narcissist. How can a child? My niece faced that with her older son, Michael, who is 8. He blamed himself, typically, of children, he blamed himself for the divorce for about 3 months before he would tell her. And she finally wangled it out of him because he had finally said, it's not Dad's fault, it's not your fault, it's not Andrew's fault. Well, that leaves Michael. So he finally said, it was because it's my fault because I'm trying to think, there were 2 things. One of which was he accidentally hit his dad one time, but it was purely by accident. And he was the child that when Mike would get mad, he would tell Michael, you're stupid. And Michael has said to Anne, I'm stupid. Now, he's in 2nd grade now, and he's in the gifted program. He's far from stupid. But he has taken that on over time, and she has tried to get in between them and do the damage control when Mike simply expounds what he thinks and projects his anger. Chronic low self-esteem, never good enough. How many of you have ever heard of Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child? You might want to jot that down. It's not an easy read, but it really is about not giving a child an opportunity to become who they are and how that takes place. It's an excellent book. It's been out a long time, kind of a classic, but of the pain that children go through when who they are gets squashed, when the only time they get that parent's approval and attention, and the only time the parent has bright eyes for them is when that child is simply mirroring what the parent wants, but not who they are. Now, narcissism in the workplace. We never encounter this very often, but I'm just kidding. Some of you might be here because that's what you face. And in some ways it's very, very similar. But again, you're gonna, let me find my, this can be just about as difficult to deal with. Some of you might not be dealing with narcissism at home, but you are dealing with narcissism in the workplace. And it doesn't have to be leadership. It can be underneath leadership. But these are going to be the people who promote themselves. You are not truly going to be valued. They are not truly team players. They might say that they are, but they're not. It's really all about them. Bottom line, it's all about them. Obviously, many of them are attracted to positions of high leadership, the CEOs, attorneys, doctors, clergy, managers, professors. But these are the people who tend to abuse power. They can be the bullies in the workplace. They can be the ones that create the hostile work environments. And it can be very subtle. Again, this can be the sandpaper kind of thing, where it just takes a toll on you a little at a time. Because when we find ourselves underneath people like this, over time that you really don't matter in the scheme of things. Now, if I need you to look good, or if I want to steal your work or your ideas or use you to do my bidding, fine and dandy, you're my best buddy. Or if in the workplace I need to recruit flying monkeys, people who will support me no matter how bad I am, then there are always people you can suck in that will think that you're marvelous, even if you're not. And that'll happen. They want the attention, they'll go to great lengths to get it. Even if they have to step on you, they feel entitled. They believe in their own insight, their own power, their own way of doing things, and they'll do what they can to do that. If they're hard, obviously, lacking that empathy, they're not going to understand what it's like for you to deal with them, and it really doesn't matter to them. If you have personal problems, that's not going to matter anyway. They really are not good teachers. They're not good mentors. I would not have wanted to grow up as a professional underneath someone like that, because they're not about you succeeding. As a matter of fact, because narcissists like to be the best at something, if you actually do something better than they do, it threatens them to the core. And they will take whatever measures they can to do something about you. Just in the interest of time, because I gave you this, I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time on this because technically we have 5 minutes. And I do want to get to looking at just for a few moments. What are some of the things that you can't change? They do not understand who they are. I think one of the greatest insights that you can carry away from this is that they don't see it. They don't understand it. That's one of the things that's characteristic about personality disorders that you think, how can they not see it? It's because it developed early on. It coalesces into who they are. It's all they know. And so they're just being who they are. They don't have a clue that it is as pathological as it is. And even if you explain it, it's going to miss. You're not going to get anywhere. Typically, you're not going to get anywhere. When we think of whether this is treatable, if you have younger people or people that are on the lower end of the spectrum and they have a little insight into it and they're willing to work on it, then there's a little bit of hope to do that. Especially if they have not really grown up yet, that works. But if you have adults who have lived their whole life this way, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but they usually don't show up for treatment. They're not going to come in and say, guess what? I'm a narcissist. Not going to happen. Other people seek treatment because they're in pain. They're not in pain. You're in pain. You will probably seek treatment because you're in a relationship with them, but they are not. And if they do show up, it's typically because they become depressed. If their world sort of falls apart, or things don't go the way they want, or something goes wrong that messes with their world, they can become depressed, and then they will show up. Medication typically doesn't help except to treat symptoms like depression. When they get older, it can be even worse because they have not cultivated a social network of people that will help them as they get older. They can be alone, they can be miserable, but they usually don't seek treatment. They lack insight and self-reflection. We've talked about that. It's not there. It's not about you. They're very well defended. No matter what you talk to them about, they're going to have an excuse for it. They're going to be able to explain it in a way that is consistent with them. It's going to make sense in their world. It's going to make sense in yours, and you're not going to get anywhere with that. Unlikely to change. We have to have realistic expectations. Sometimes our expectations are higher than we can achieve. And I think becoming more versed in this disorder, if you really think that's what you're dealing with in somebody's life, that can help you because it helps solidify within us that it's not us. And never make your self-worth dependent on them. They cannot give you what typical human beings give you in the give and take of life. It's not going to come from them. They are not going to reflect your value, your worth, because it's all about them. They're not going to be able to pay you compliments, but you certainly can compliment them. Even with children, they typically will not compliment the child. They will brag about their children to everybody else. Oh, these are my children. Let me tell you about my children and what they did. But they don't tell the child. Or they might brag about you. You're a wonderful wife. You're a wonderful cook. You're a wonderful whatever. They are not going to tell you. And so you end up in the pain. But it's really about making themselves look good, whether it's on Facebook or with friends or coworkers or whatever. But if your self-worth is dependent upon them, you're in trouble. What things can change? Number one, we can break our denial. I think sometimes, and that's what I've seen happen in my niece. When this thing first